like I just said, Olumide, sentiment in the banking sector looks quite good, certainly on the back of great Q3 numbers. What's your take on certainly how we're seeing investors playing the banking sector so far?
Good morning, Uche. Nice to be back on the open exchange. I think general analysts have said the banking sector has been very consistent in terms of the back of the Q3 results. We expect that in your analysis here, one thing you didn't measure was that the all banks financial sector grew by 0.69% yesterday. I think the investors' confidence is quietly coming back, and I think we will see more gains going forward in terms of the growth and returns within the banking sectors. Q3 has kind of given us a benchmark for what we expect, for year end with most of the banks, which most of the banks probably hitting what they expect to hit for year end. So we're quite confident that things will remain very robust and going forward for end of year projections.
That's right, Olumide. I mean, most analysts expect it to be a smooth ride in Q4 for banks, but I mean, last week we had the CBN coming announcing that the financial inclusion strategy is fully on board now. They announced the board. How do you think this is going to affect banks, this new financial inclusion strategy? And of course, what are banks doing to push this strategy by the CBN forward?
Okay. The financial inclusion strategy framework has been going on now for about 9-10 months. In fact, longer than that. But the strategy document came out at the start of the year. And in line with what most banks are thinking in terms of how do we go forward, it lays credence to the retail strategy for most banks. Now, this is an ongoing thing in terms of what we think the banks will actually do. It's one of the areas where we think there is growth in the market. Now, remember, going by population alone, you still have a huge potential in terms of how the banks can actually increase their revenues and income, looking at untapped markets. Now, the key to this is obviously how the banks approach this and how the strategy they adopt to actually, because it's a very highly capitalized intensive market in terms of looking at financial inclusion. And going by what the CBN has laid down in terms of their ambitious targets, for financial inclusion, which is, more branches, more ATMs, more financial literacy to the people that don't have financial access, more consumer protection. There's a lot of work still needs to be done in terms of how we want to drive this process within the retail banking sector. And I think, it's an evolving thing. We're still going to get a lot of, it's early days in some regard. The board that the CBN announced last week or just a short while ago, it's just to try and drive that process going forward. But there's a lot of things going on already within the banking sector, to actually address some of these issues.
Right. I mean, and I think one important question is it profitable for retail banks like Diamond Bank? I mean, you mentioned that this strategy is going to be, retail bankers tend to adopt a long-term strategy, while this CBN is saying they actually want this financial inclusion strategy to come into play by 2010. I mean, they want to see results by 2010. What do you think this means for retail bankers like Diamond Bank?
Yeah, the CBN wants the objective for 2020, and I think there are two dimensions to this. 2020. There are two dimensions to this. The first dimension is, well, the banks are interested and the banks want to make money generally, and the only way they're going to go into something like this is if there is the infrastructure, the regulation to actually allow them to drive this process. The second dimension is, well, yes, we all want to go into this. We think it's profitable in terms of long term, but the key to it is deciding the best approach to it. One of the main things that is driving these areas is technology, and technology in terms of mobile payment, in terms of ATMs and alternative delivery channels is going to play a very big part in terms of how this strategy is going to be driven forward. Now, whether we look at it from a long-term view or a short-term view, it's left to how the industry perceive, seeing this as a core area that they're going to develop. There still needs to be a mindset change in terms of looking at this from a retail angle, retail perspective, as opposed to the traditional banks, traditional way the banks have done in the past, which is more corporate banking and business banking going forward. It takes a different mindset and a different game changer to actually look into this. But I'm confident that most of the banks are quite honestly interested in this area. The question is understanding this area and understanding how they want to do it while bringing a return to equity to their shareholders.